Welcome back to Mind Over Matter with your host Anya. Today, we are diving into something that separates those who thrive from those who merely survive mental toughness. But here's the twist, it's not about being hard or unbreakable. True mental toughness comes from knowing who we are and not who we think we are. Joining us today is Florence, a self realization coach who helps people navigate challenges, develop emotional resilience, and reconnect with their authentic selves. If you ever felt like you're constantly fighting against yourself or struggling to maintain emotional balance in difficult times, this episode is for you. So let's get started. So, Florence, welcome. Many people believe that mental toughness means powering through emotions, but you define it differently. Can you explain what mental toughness really is?
Well, yes. Hello, Anya, and thank you so much for welcoming me on your show. And you're right. Oftentimes, mental toughness is depicted as having grit and bouncing back and pushing harder. And this is certainly called for in certain occasions. But I have found that it, for me, what made the difference and what really elevated my life and made a big difference was actually finding ease, finding effortlessness, and finding a certain lightness into life. And the first place where I encountered that was in my yoga practice, where I was invited to find the lightness in the pose. And I remember that at first I was wondering what the teacher was talking about because the poses felt difficult. I struggled. And at some point, I had a bit of a breakthrough and I found that ease. I found my breath. I found how I really noticed how all the different systems in the body were working together. And the beauty of it is that that understanding started to splash outside of the yoga class, off of the yoga mat into life. And I got curious as to where else could I see this ease allowing me to move forward and become more of what I wanted to be.
Mm-hmm. So, how does self awareness play a role in developing true mental strength?
That's a great question. I think that up until we start turning our sight inward, we are tempted to look on the outside for strategies and processes. We may adopt other people's recipes, and some may be a good fit, and some not so much. And when we try something that wasn't really meant to be a fit to begin with, it leaves us with a feeling of failure, a sense of us being inadequate when it might not have been a good match to begin with. When we start turning our gaze inward, not in a navel gazing way, but really feeling into who we are beyond the idea of who we are, then we start finding a way forward, whether we're dealing with a problem, whether we're dealing with discomfort, we're starting to find our solutions. That's when we're tapping into our wisdom, something beyond ourselves, really, that that guides us gently, that guides us with clarity. And so then instead of being drowned into all sorts of external strategies and a lot of the noise and chaos from the outside, we find our way back to our inner peace. And from that inner peace, which is really what we feel into when we are in that knowing ourselves better at a deeper level, we find that guidance. And from there, life feels a whole lot easier.
Mm-hmm. And that's so refreshing. Like, it's not about suppressing emotions, but
Mhm.
actually understanding and working with them.
Yes. Exactly. Because the thing that we fail to see, it's because we're not really shown that, is that the emotions that we experience are the product of the thinking that we have. So I think at this time, it's pretty much well known that we rehash the same thoughts over and over again. I think something like 90% of what we think is a rehash of what we were thinking the day before. So a lot of what we think is habitual, it's automatic. And because our experience, our feelings are tied to our thinking, if we have a habit of thinking sad thoughts, we tend to have an overall feeling of sadness. And we may not be able to pinpoint specifically a reason why, which may again reinforce that feeling of inadequacy. Like, why am I always feeling so sad, even when things are looking up for me? Or life is not that bad, but yet I can't quite connect with it. What's going on? So when we really see closely that connection, when we observe the relationship between what's on our mind and how we're feeling, we start to become better gardeners of our mental landscape. We become more choosy as to what we think about. We place our attention with more intention. And when we do that, it does for us the miraculous transformation of us going from something that's automatic and oftentimes not so enjoyable to really engaging with life, engaging with the people we are communicating with, engaging with the little moments and the richness that they offer. So that emotional piece, we tend to think of it as something that happens to us. But when we see that connection between the emotion and the thought, that gives us that key to start playing and understanding what is going on for us. Maybe also because we seek that balance rather than, like you said at the very beginning of this episode, forcing a particular feeling or feeling bad for feeling bad. We start looking at what emotion we are present to, start naming it with more accuracy. And from there, we might even be able to see and realize that there's a pattern that is at play. So by noticing that pattern, we can then just let it go. We don't even have to necessarily play the dance of changing and shifting a negative thought for a positive thought. Just noticing that, oh, this is what has been at play all along, and I don't have to buy it always. Maybe sometimes it's useful, maybe not. Just by seeing it in action, it helps us release it altogether.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, it does. And a big part of self realization is understanding who we really are.
Mhm,
But that's easier said than done. So,
mhm.
what are the biggest barriers that stop people from embracing their true selves?
Um, to me, what seems to be the very first obstacle is, again, that habitual thinking. We get caught up into a certain identification. We tend to see ourselves in a certain way. We describe ourselves in a certain way, and we do that pretty mechanically after a while. So that's the main thing, is that when we get really attached to an idea of who we are, it it creates that rigidity that prevents us from changing, shifting, evolving. That's where we feel stuck. And I don't know for you, but I certainly have had many experiences of feeling stuck at one point or another in my life. And this is something that a lot of my clients, even friends, tend to speak of and express, that feeling stuck, stuck in a situation, stuck in a job, stuck, you name it. We feel that um, we feel that contention. We feel contained, and the way of realizing this and feeling our way back to who we truly are, that's where, like I said, when we identify a thought or a thought pattern, it can be released. When we release a way of seeing ourselves, a way of thinking of ourselves, because we feel more closely into who we truly are, that's liberation. And that invites opportunities, that invites novelty, that invites shifts. And that's how we truly feel more engaged, once again, more capable in of dancing with the moment.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, what is the first step someone can take to start peeling back those layers?
I tend to find that for me, connection with breath, connection with body is a good entry point because I'm mostly a tactile person. But I think that for people who are very visual, visualizing an alternative future, visualizing with clarity what they want, may be also a great way to create a little vacuum, to create some space between the situation where they may feel off and start orienting themselves into a place where they feel good or better. It starts to free the it starts to free us from what currently is binding. So I think that looking first and foremost into where we tend to be most at ease. Are we comfortable with sound? Are we enjoying physical sensations? Are we very easily stimulated visually? That kind of gives us already some clues as to what might be some practices that be a good fit for us. But the first place to hone into is the place of now, where we are right now. And sometimes, when I was saying earlier that for a person who's very visual, visualizing a future that they can, where they see themselves happy, it's not so much that put them in the now, but at least it disengages them from maybe, let's say, a view of the future that might be scary, or maybe they're stuck somewhere in the past. So at least by choosing a place where to put the attention, where to look to, that helps creating a gap between what is at that moment generating some discomfort so that we can make our way back to this very moment, noticing that, oh, this helps me to see that I was really making up a whole story about this upcoming event, or I was just not able, or I wasn't giving myself enough room to make, take a step away from this thing that happened 2 days ago, a week ago, a year ago.
Mm-hmm. Right. And that's so powerful. Like sometimes the hardest part is admitting that we are not being fully honest with ourselves.
Yeah, yeah. And it's done unconsciously. It's not that
Mm-hmm.
we wanting to lie to ourselves, but it's very easy to get caught up into a doom scenario of the future. Maybe we're anticipating a meeting and we're stressing out about it. And in that moment, it looks very scary, and we tend to scare ourselves more with all the things that could go wrong. And that's not that we're trying consciously to make things more difficult for us. But like you said, in that moment, we're not clear as to what is actually happening, and we're not distinguishing it from what could be happening. And the could be happening is something that has not happened yet. It's a complete creation. And that's where there's this dishonesty, if we want to call it that way. but it's also because we have very fertile imaginations. And it's a mechanism of preservation. We tend to look for what could go wrong in order to prevent it. But from that mechanism that was extremely useful for survival, we have a tendency to overuse it and fall into, like I was saying, the creation of doomsday scenarios where everything is going wrong, and we're not performing well, or everything, people we're encountering are not being supportive. Whatever the story we're telling ourselves, it becomes very convincing, and we're not seeing that it's not reality, that it's not truth, that it's not an honest depiction in that moment. Again, it looks extremely convincing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, you have worked with people who have faced some deep struggles.
Mhm.
What are some key habits or mindsets that help build emotional resilience?
Well, I'm a fervent practitioner of morning practices. I'm a practitioner of practices. I found that for myself and a number of people that I've helped along the way, starting the day with an activity where they can really tune in with themselves has been extremely transformative. I heard I don't remember where it was, but someone was saying that it becomes a refuge. When you get into certain practices, these practices become reliable. You know that in all the uncertainty of life, there are those practices you can count on. And it doesn't have to be a specific practice. Um, I think, again, it's a matter of taste. There might be things in life that we connect with more easily at certain times than others. So that's where we need, again, some flexibility. Self-discipline is it's a two-edged sword. Yes, we can then build a strong practice of something by dedicating ourselves and being disciplined about it. But discipline can also lead to too much rigidity, where it doesn't match anymore the circumstances or the needs of the day. We stay, again, stuck into a practice that at that point isn't quite as lively. But I have found that for people who found a practice that they connected with well, may it be journaling, for some people, it could be having a walk first thing in the morning, it could be simply having a coffee on their patio, just taking time for oneself, creating a space before the day to put your attention where you want it to be and check in with yourself. Really dial into that peace, in that well being. That makes a world of a difference for people who have known struggle and for people who are in the middle of something chaotic or difficult.
Mm, that's amazing. Yeah. So, how do you people practice self compassion while also themselves to grow?
I'm sorry, could you repeat your question? The sound broke off a little bit.
So, how do you recommend people practice self compassion while also pushing themselves to grow?
Hmm. Well, that's a really great question. And it's great to have formulas to help guide us. And at the same time, we want to keep that flexibility. So, growth oftentimes comes from pushing the edges of our comfort zone. We get into an activity that doesn't feel yet very comfortable because it's unknown, because it's new. So, pushing the edges of that really requires an effort. And because we are in that effort and we are doing something that's out of our normal, that's where self compassion really plays a key role. Yes, we do want to possibly measure ourselves. in comparison to where we were 2 days ago, see if we're making progress, see if things are evolving and moving. But at the same time, we can very easily fall back into self criticism and self judgment. And self compassion is really the remedy to that. Self compassion is being in the awareness of the process. It's understandable that when we do something for the first time, or that we haven't done that we didn't do in a long time, it doesn't feel easy. It doesn't feel necessarily very good at first. And it's important at that moment to look and be honest as to where did we start and where are we now? What are we moving towards? And see that it's okay to be maybe challenged. It's a part of life. So self compassion is really, like I was saying, the antidote to self criticism and self judgment. Yes, we want discernment. Yes, we want to be able to measure our progress in whatever area we're wanting to grow. But at the same time, in order to do that in a way that is truly fulfilling, self compassion has to be an everyday partner.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Like, growth doesn't have to mean suffering, it can also mean gentle transformation.
Mhm. Yes, exactly. And that suffering is really tied to the criticism that we can bring. We make ourselves wrong for doing something one way rather than another. But again, compassion is there to say life happens. Things are not perfect. We don't even aim for perfection. We're just doing the best we can. When we really know that we are doing the best we can, that alleviates a lot of the unwarranted pressure. And from there, that's where that growth happens in fulfillment rather than from strictness and toughness.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Florence, this was such a powerful discussion. Thank you for helping us redefine mental toughness and showing us how self awareness is the key to resilience. To our
Thank you.
listeners, Mhm. To our listeners, if today's episode spoke to you, take some time to reflect. Are you being true to yourself or just playing a role? And if you're ready to dive deeper, connect with Florence and explore her work. Until next time, stay strong, stay self aware, and embrace who you truly are.